Okay, boom, we're back again today. Another Daily Boy episode. Last time we was talking about it is Islam. That was the video where basically I tried to show that this counter narrative that, like, you can't blame Islam for a lot of the stuff that's going on. It's not really Islam. It's like politics and these type of things. I kind of took that from I kind of took that argument from off under its foot because I gave about 20 points as to why some of these things happen. It is definitely interconnected. Of course, I didn't say that it's only Islam to blame for this type of stuff, but you can't ignore Islam as a part of the context of all of the things that are going on across the globe. We're talking about politics, we're talking about faith, we're talking about religion, we're talking about morality, we're talking about, what I'm saying, relationships between the West and the East. We're talking about strifing and fighting and wars and all of this type of stuff, killing all over the globe and all this stuff that's going on. Today, the other video that's going to supplement that video is this idea that it isn't the West. You know what I'm saying? The reason I'm talking about this one as well is every time you talk about something that happens, people have their countries, it's hurting, it's damaged, it's broken, the system is weird, they're in poverty a lot of times for the vast majority of their population. And there is this idea of the big bad West boogeyman, America, that's going around, and everything that's happening to all of these nations, Guyana, Jamaica, Venezuela and Iran and Egypt and this one, all of it is to blame on the US. This big bad evil bully, the West, the US, the Christian dominant white people, religion, racist, bigoted, these countries, they're just evil, and they just go in and they always rob and steal and pillage everybody else's resources, and they're the reason. It's their fault. You know what I'm saying? It's them to blame. Every time you see something happening, oh, it's the big bad Israel, and it's the Jews, and they're the ones that are causing all of the problems on the earth. You know what I'm saying? This is a classic blame game situation. And so I kind of want to take that argument from under his foot today, too. We're just going to go through, we're going to have fun with it. We're going to read some information and whatnot and see if we can figure it out. Lots of wars, mini operations have destroyed countries, ripping them off from their resources. And that's the claim that we're going to kind of look at today. First, I want to acknowledge that U.S. intervention is a real thing, and it's happening, and like it does happen, and it can contribute. And this is similar to the other video where I'm not saying, even though I'm saying it is Islam, that's the title. If you listen to the full context, I'm saying, hey, it's not only Islam, but there's a lot of things within Islamic traditions and culture and Islamic literature that does lead to some of the strife that you're seeing, that does lead to the differences in the worldview that you're seeing, that does have its background and its history building up to some of the things that you have seen happen, right? Similar to that, I'm not saying it's not the US and they're not involved at all. So I want to acknowledge that the Western, and I'm gonna interchange. Sometimes I'm gonna talk about the West, sometimes I'm gonna say US. So you guys get the point. There's this like oppas thing going on. There's the ops, there's the mandem on this side, there's the mandem on that side. We're gonna get some nuances, and we're gonna get to look at it carefully because, again, it's helpful to understand what's going on. The Bible says, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. It's good to understand the schemes and the devices of the enemy and the things that are dividing us, and it's good to get to the root of the problem. You can't treat something you're misdiagnosing, you know what I'm saying? Unless you get the proper diagnostic, you won't be able to treat whatever it is. You won't even really understand what the ailment is. You're just seeing symptoms, right? And so let's get into some of the other points I got here. Poverty is always going to be with you. That's another thing I wanted to talk about. You know what I'm saying? Jesus says this. You know what I'm saying? When we're talking about poverty and all the countries that, oh, they're like poor because of the, bro, the word of God tells you that poor people are everywhere. Dog, where I live right now, I drive down the street 15 minutes and I see people laid out all over the street. Poverty, you know what I'm saying, stricken. People dying out there. Man's having their foot getting cut off because they got frostbite because they're out there in the winter, and it's happening. It's happening. Bruh, sometimes I feel like a dilly boy, God forbid, might just fall into poverty. I'm gonna tell you something. Sometimes it gets sticky. Right now, Canada's economy is not the best, and this is some of the things that we're talking about and highlighting. We're getting some background into, anyways. You know what I'm saying? So it's good to know, anyways. But like this stuff is everywhere, and to a degree, poverty is something that you kind of need. You kind of need. It is, like I say, that seems weird, right? Like you could wipe out poverty and then everything's going to be okay. Nah, within the biblical context, there's this idea of if you don't work, you won't eat. You know what I'm saying? And there's something about seeing people out there in the street, in the cold, losing their thing, you know what I'm saying? Uncomfortable, no bed to sleep on, nothing like that. That motivates you and drives you and gets you to get up and get out. And bro, like there's a innate human characteristic where we just want to be lazy. We just want to like sleep in. We just want to do our thing. We just want to like not take responsibility. Y'all ever feel like that? You could be up the whole night, and then the minute you have to go do something, you're super tired. You want to like sleep, and you know what I'm saying? Like laziness is a human tendency. It's a fleshly, earthly tendency, and it's something that is an innate desire of ours that we want to fulfill. That's easy, and it's like, you know what I'm saying. And we need to be driven in order to get up. We need motivation in order to get up. And this idea that there's a line of poverty there waiting to consume you. The Bible says it's like it pounces on you like a lion, you know what I'm saying? It's like at your feet, essentially waiting for you. And so you, as a man, especially, you know what I'm saying, not talking to the woman, them, you know what I'm saying, they got their responsibility as well. But I believe that men are providers. Men are meant to be provide security for their family, for their society. I often blame men for everything, even the stuff that we say, okay, the women and the feminism and all. I'm like, yeah, but you guys, bro, you got like, we are, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. We are in a position of authority, and anytime something's happening within our family structures, within our societal structure, I'm bringing it back to us, and I'm saying, hey, bro, like we need to be able to take care of business, and we need to apply. I do that with parents too, you know what I'm saying? Every time you see people complaining about, oh, this generation, their mind is hey, but their money, you know, bruh, that's their fault. You know what I'm saying? You raised that generation. You raised the next generation. It's on us. It's incumbent upon us to take care of our next generation, to, you know what I mean, be wise and looking out for danger and helping to avoid the trajectory of where things are going. Bro, all this stuff that's plaguing our society, population replacement issues. I got a video on that. Y'all could check it out. All of this stuff with the LGBT stuff, all the abortion stuff, all the stuff that's like really causing detriment. Even the like invasion of the East to the West and the clash of civilizations and all that type of stuff. It's us, bro. It's policymakers. It's, you know what I'm saying? It's really like right now, you know, you look at California, you know, they say you get what you elect, you know what I'm saying? Like if Canada continues to elect liberals and like, you know, people who are, yeah, you saying like eventually, bro, we're the ones, like we're the nation, we're the ones that are getting zooted in the background, and we're the ones that are electing these people to positions of authority. But poverty will strike anywhere, and so like it kind of is a necessary danger that we need to have, a motivation. I would put it like a fear of like falling off the edge of a cliff that would make a reasonable person not stand too close to it or not mess around over it or whatever, because there's a danger there, there's a line, and in a way we need it to be there. And so in a sense, it's like we need poverty to exist, and it will always exist. It's, you got people attempting to solve poverty, bro. You just look up people who have won lotteries and see where their life went a little farther down the road. I guarantee you, you go right now into the streets and you load up a crackhead with a bunch of money thinking that you're gonna solve their problems. It ain't gonna work, bro. You know what I'm saying? That guy would be dead the same night, God forbid, you know what I mean? Because he'll probably just go sniff a whole bunch of crack and do whatever else other cracked out stuff he was doing. Most likely, you know what I'm saying? So you don't fix these problems by throwing money at it or something like that. These problems are integrated into the human experience in a way that it will always exist. So that to me gets rid of this whole, oh, it's the West to blame for your poverty. You know what I'm saying? Not necessarily, bro. Poverty is a necessary thing that is existing, not even just in the West as well, although the West is a lot more thriving, you know what I'm saying, especially when we look at a country like Canada or the US and those type of places. But, you know what I'm saying, they have poverty in their nations as well, and poverty across the globe is something that will always exist. So I don't know if we could just totally blame that on the West, right? Even if you're saying that your enemies like took you over and they're the ones that like are violating you, rinse you for your resources, I want to let's put this ball back in the court, because this is a thing that we do when we play the blame game a lot, right? Especially even not even just on a nation level, like even on an individual basis, we do this thing where it's always somebody else's fault. Oh, they did this to me. Oh, it's my mama. It's my pops. So, they never gave me. Oh, it's my teacher, my fourth grade teacher. It's this one person that violated me when I was a kid. And so that's why I couldn't rise out of the slum. It's because of where I grew up. And it's because of my skin color. And it's always something else to blame. If we never take the time to introspect and see what's wrong with us, even if we were to say that the West was doing stuff to people, you know what I'm saying, East or whatever, you know what I'm saying, I would say, bro, it's time to sit and introspect and say, so why is it that we get zooted? Like, why is it that this is allowed? How come this happens to us? How come we can't come together? How come we can't hold hands? How come, you know what I'm saying? And just kind of introspect in order to correct the issue that you're having in your nations and and all over the world, you know what I'm saying? Individually, interpersonally, internationally, nationally, whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? We got to start doing some introspecting, not just blaming everybody on the outside, you know what I'm saying? Anytime someone says, well, it's where I grew up, if I could show you a person that grew up in that hood and came out and was better, you know what I'm saying? You cannot blame the hood, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm showing you a defeater. I'm showing you a person who defeats your argument. If you grew up in a house, you got brothers and sisters growing up in the same house, one super successful, one super like waste youth in the streets, whatever. It's not your mama and your papa, bro. Something else is going on there. That person that was super successful shared the same moms and pops that you had. So, you know what I'm saying? Now that people have individual experiences and whatnot, it's not just the experiences that you've gone through that's holding you back, because people have gone through what you've gone through and worse, and some people have made it even greater, you know what I'm saying? They've used those things as tools and motivation, and like, you know what I'm saying, and they got out of there. There's people who were born crack babies and whatnot, and you know what I'm saying, overcame that type of stuff. And it's possible. It's possible. In Jesus' mighty name, it is possible. No matter what it is you're going through in your life, no matter what you're feeling right now, no matter what it is that you feel like is holding you back, no matter who it is that you can't forgive right now that you feel like has oppressed you in your life and kept you down and kept you in the dark or whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? You could give that all to Christ. You know what I'm saying? You could that's my encouragement. But my point is, people do make it out of this type of stuff. And so all of these people need to stop placing so much blame and even introspecting. Even if we were to say, okay, the West is evil and they are doing these things, you got to start introspecting and saying, why is this are we allowing this to happen? Even if I said my neighbor is evil and broke into my house, I got to think, is my door lock messed up? Is my security in my house not good enough? Like, how can I improve my system so that this doesn't happen if I want to keep my family safe, my daughter safe, you know what I'm saying? And so there's some introspecting that needs to happen, and we got to stop playing the, oh, it's always somebody else that did us something. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think about my own nation, right? And I think about the oh my gold mine and all the gold that probably came out of there. And again, it's not just the West. Chinese are there. All types of people are there, rinsing resources and taking stuff out of the country. But then I think about my own people, bro, and how they behave sometimes, and how. And this is a thing that is another point that I was gonna make. We might as well get into it right away. Evil exists in everyone. They say it's not a skin issue, it's a sin issue. You know what I'm saying? So it's not about black, white, brown, police, ICE officer, whatever it is. That stuff doesn't make you an evil person, bro. Evil exists everywhere in every people, in every type of thing. Doctors and lawyers and pastors and preachers and moms, and they can all have evil people in all of these categories because people are peopling everywhere. People, you know what I'm saying? And that's what the truth is. So you got to make sure you're not just categorizing people at a large scale and say, well, all of America is doing this or all of is doing this. When you look at it like America as an entity, for instance, right? You're looking at an entity that has several different regimes, and this was another point I was gonna make. We'll skip it when we get there. But there's regime changes. There's people who come in, like you got Biden and Donald Trump, and a lot of the policies and a lot of the things, even some of the wars that were fought, Iran and Afghanistan, and some of these people that became president later, like Donald Trump, hated and opposed those wars and didn't really support those. And some people try to shoot this man's ear off and that type of stuff before he got in there. And you know what I'm saying? And the previous regime and his regime were at war, basically. You know what I'm saying? This is still at war. They're still at war because you still got, you know, the left and the right supports Donald Trump for the most part, and the left doesn't support Donald Trump. And then so you got now crazy stuff going on in the US where people have not, you know, people say they're democratic sometimes, and you look at them, you're like, you ain't democratic, you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of times, if you're a Democrat, you believe in the freeness and the fairness of the election. You believe that we all have different opinions. You believe that the majority votes, and then whatever they elect to happen, that's what's happening for the next 4 years. After that 4 years is done, if you don't agree, you get to vote again. And then if you get voted out, you get to sit and be quiet and chill and, you know what I'm saying, let the regime reign. You know what I'm saying? A lot of the stuff that's going on with ICE and this type of stuff, this was what the people voted for. This is what the U.S. voted for. You know what I'm saying? They voted for immigration regulation. They voted for, you know what I'm saying, deporting all of the illegal immigrants and the other people and those type of stuff. That maybe because, you know, I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but, you know, the illegal immigrants are technically committing a crime by entering the U.S. illegally. Of course, it's a misdemeanor if you enter like on a visitor visa and then you just overstay your welcome or something like that, which is still a crime, by the way. It's just not classified as serious a crime as the other crime is, but you would be illegal for that. But then there's the category of people who are actually committing grave you know, violations of of the law and stuff like that, grapes and the like, you know what I'm saying. And so there's all of that stuff going on. People vote and whatnot, but you got all these regimes that make up America, and under certain regimes, you can't blame other regimes for what happened under other regimes. You could still accumulate this and say, well, this is all America did this, you know what I'm saying? But you have to recognize there's people coming into power in various times in the history, vehemently fighting against each other's opinion, all on different sides of the spectrum, and getting elected and whatnot. So when you blame a whole, you know, group for, and you lump everybody into this one category, all police are evil, all ICE agents are evil, all white people are evil, all Americans are all American regimes are the same, all of the regimes of the thing, and they have all the same policies, Israel and this one and that one, all Israelis, all the Jews, all the Muslims. You know what I'm saying? You're not allowed to do that, G. You know what I'm saying? Bruh, I'm gonna tell you guys a little story one time since we're here, right? I grew up in Toronto, Ontario. For the most parts, I came here. I was like 13, stayed until I was about 20, boogied back to Guyana, came back at 23, and you know what I mean. But I'm gonna tell you something. We was hoodlums. We was in the hood. We was living in the forest. We was drinking. We was smoking. We was partying. Yo, we was. I mean, some of the neighborhood people like this and whatnot. We had a lot of run-ins with the cops, man. My life, I had a lot of run-ins with the cops. Now, some of y'all might say, "Man, Dale, that's your own personal experience, whatever." But my experience with police was overwhelmingly good experiences. All of them awesome dudes, and I could sit here and tell you stories after stories of boy them coming through for me in real ways, like helping me out of situations and whatnot. Those people didn't know me, but they saw me, and I know what they saw now because as an older head looking at youths in the street and whatnot, I know what they were doing for me now, and I can appreciate it a lot better now, and I understand that they were looking out for me now. And but the culture that I grew up in hated cops. You know what I'm saying? We was part of this hip hop culture, and we were supposed to hate these people, but that was not my experience with them. So you can't label all of these people and lump them into one category. They're human beings. They all have various different opinions and thoughts. Given the U.S. for example, you know what I'm saying? The U.S. be out here rioting and stuff like that. People from within the U.S., white liberal women, just be out here rioting and behaving bad for their minority population and all this type of stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, it's not fair to lump everybody and be like, oh, the West and this. You know what I'm saying? They did this to us. You know what I mean? Hold on. Let me take a look up. Power up, if you will. Fuel. Getting fueled. So, people are evil everywhere. That's one of my other points. Let's see. It's the love of money. Like a lot of times that you'll see is the issue, right? So, in my little country, Guyana, for instance, we got so many rich resources. One time I found out there was like $4 billion in gold found somewhere in the US or something like that was getting rinsed out from Guyana and sent away and whatnot. And I was starting to think, I was like, man, I don't know if we have $4 billion or USD as our GDP, and they found $4 billion worth of gold coming out of Guyana in 4 months, something like that. Don't quote me, but it was a ridiculous amount. And I was saying to myself, bro, this gold mine has been operating for donkey years, and we don't. And bro, a lot of times it's our own people rinsing the country for the resources and taking it and selling it to the West and selling it. And they're selling it to Mati own people across the way. We're not gonna talk about it because, Daily Boy has enough to get shot for already. Like, you know what I'm saying? But we know what going with our resources there. Even the foreigners that come and take resources from us, they're paying some delegate, some high up individual, and that guy now is running with the money and selling out the country's resources. These dudes are evil, and they have it in their heart, bro. I wanted to tell y'all a little story. I don't know if I should, but I have, people around my circle, let's say, who, are involved in law enforcement, let's say, and in Guyana. Oh, shucks, said too much. Anyways, but in Guyana, my dukes, told me that if they catch like a certain drug bust, let's say, we're talking candid now, you know what I'm saying? My dukes is gonna know. Anyways, they catch something, right? And, the other officers now, it's automatic. Yo, we're gonna take some of the whatever the drugs is, we're gonna sell it back, whatever, you know what I'm saying? We're gonna probably book them on a minor amount, they're gonna get a slap up, whatever, right? If you as one of the boy them is not taking the money, you know what I'm saying, you probably get popped out because them mans are now looking at you like you're a snitch, you're a sellout, you're a person, so you can't even show them no face. You have to just take that money, you know what I'm saying? And so there is a lot of corruption from within our own system, from within our own societies, that is leading to a lot of this stuff. And then we think about the boy them in the in the in the hot sun, standing there looking for traffic violations, find you on a traffic violation. You're like, boss, hold his 10,000. You know what I mean? Guy on a 10,000 is nothing. And you're trying to like bribe him, you know what I'm saying? And maybe he doesn't take the bribe. Maybe this dude is a solid dude, which 90% of the time, man's taking the bribe. But, anyways, let's say he doesn't. Maybe he's solid. Maybe he's an upstanding character. He's a Christian. He's a good dude. He's trying to see the country be, you know what I'm saying, flourish and be better. He's trying to be an honorable man of God. You know what I'm saying? Guess who's going to take it? The other guy, police at the station, is going to take it before they write him up. The superintendent is going to take it. Somebody else is going to take it somewhere along the line and mash up that paperwork, you know what I'm saying, and dash out that ticket, you know what I'm saying. All this guy is doing is wasting his time. So corruption, greed, love of money, everywhere, fam. And a lot of times this goes back to that point that I was making earlier, where we're saying, yo, you cannot blame play the blame game and always, not introspect and say what's going on with us, and, like, you know what I mean, and say that, yo, it's some other nation's evil that they did to us that's causing us to be able to stumble, right? So let's see what else. When we talk about colonialism and slavery, this is one of the things that come up. Oh, the West, they were the ones. We talk about the West as if they invented slavery, you know what I'm saying? Meanwhile, slavery existed all across the whole globe at the same time. And the West is largely the nations that, like, spent a lot of their time, talent, money, and treasure, blood, sweat, and tear to eradicate it from the rest of the earth. People don't talk about that. They never talk about the West in this positive light. They always talk about the West. Even the West, bro. Right now, there's a problem within the West where our education systems and stuff like that is teaching our kids all of this dark stuff about the history of, like, slavery and what they did and what they did to the natives and but they don't teach you all of the redeemable characteristics, all of the great and amazing things that the West has accomplished and did, even when it comes to those type of things. For instance, did you guys know that only 2% of white Americans, own slaves? 2 out of every 100 white Americans. That's still a lot, right? But 2% only, bro. So, like, you know what I'm saying? 98% of the Americans. And that time, 2% was actually a lower number compared to other empires that ruled the world before the U.S. was a superpower. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of the slaves that existed were mainly on, like, large factory type productions. You know what I'm saying? Like, these were like larger plantations and things like that were ran and, like, owned. And that's why that 2% was there. But 98% of people never owned slaves. White American people never owned slaves. You don't hear? When I heard that statistic, I was like, no way. And I went and checked it. And because in my mind, the way how we always taught was every white person owned slaves. Even who are native white people that were there from before is a different story. How many people came from Italy and Europe and stuff like that way after slavery was already done. It's very, you know what I'm saying? It skews the numbers a lot, right? But only 2%, so 90%, 98% of these people were probably in poverty the same way. They were probably just working the same way. And a lot of them were probably just, broke and trying to make it, you know what I mean? That's not the narrative you're told, you know what I'm saying, when you're listening. And we're going to talk about why it is that the West is not educating their kids in this way. And basically, spoiler alert, it's foreign influence that's teaching our kids hate against ourselves. You know what I'm saying? I'm including us in that, even though I'm not a white male, and I'm probably just a plantation worker, my family, ourselves. But what I mean is, there's like this idea of West and East, and this idea of, demonizing the U.S. and those type of things, not talking about all of the redeemable characteristics of these type of things. Slavery, all this evil existed all across the globe. Even with the natives, the way they talk about the natives, for instance, is like they were just these And to me, a lot of these people are the racists, bro. A lot of these people that like talk about these, I mean, we had like a politician, and this is, from the Democratic side, that was like trying to say why black people don't know how to use computers and they can't get IDs, and voter IDs are racist because black people can't get voter IDs. I seen like one black guy make a video where he's like listening to this, and he's playing this in the background, and he's like seeing a computer, and he's like pretending to be a monkey and jumping and touching it and jumping back. Obviously he's making fun of her because she's trying to act like, what I'm saying, these people are like, I don't know, prehistoric or something like that. They don't understand anything. To me, that is the racist thing. You know what I'm saying? That is messed up, actually. You know what I'm saying? And I'm confounded by why they don't see this as a problem. I'm confounded by why they don't like see that they're actually like mad. They're kind of messed up. They're the racist ones. They're the ones they talk about. They're fighting for justice, anyways, right? Whatever, right? But when they talk about the Native Americans were like very like advanced civilization. They were very, the way we think about them is very ahistorical. No doubt they had like raids and they had all kind of stuff, but I think it took the U.S. people that landed there. Remember, originally people landed in small numbers and whatnot. Later, in larger numbers. Of course, they were more technologically advanced in the fact that they had guns and those type of things. But they, even in that case, they couldn't defeat these natives that easily, bro. Those mans were warriors. Those mans knew how to traverse the terrain. They had a different form of warfare that they weren't Americans. They were Europeans coming to America, or British natives coming to America first. That then was engaging in a warfare that they had to adapt to. These guys normally, what I'm saying, our historical stuff from the Roman Empire and this type of stuff, man's walked up to each other on a big battlefield somewhere. They made a time and date, they set it up, and they dealt with it. You know what I mean? Sometimes a bit of retreat, sometimes some re-tactical positioning. They got their army flanks and their, their horsemen's over here, their archers over here, and they got their battering rams or whatever, right? And they're coming. It's tactics, bro. If you study these wars and like watch a lot of these historical war videos, amazing stuff going on, amazing like turn of events and stuff like that. I was watching one with the Spartans and the 300, and what I'm saying, the 35,000 that marched out to meet the Persian army and stuff like that. Amazing stuff, cool stuff, right? Within the history. Now, that was not the same as how the natives dealt with their thing. You know what I'm saying? They came here, they would like, pop out, they would take out a couple of mans, disappear back into the bushes, regroup somewhere if they were getting attacked and they felt like they were overwhelmed. They kept running and regrouping, and it took like 100 years. And there was one tribe, I forget what the tribe name is, that you guys probably know it, that was incredible and like really like advanced and really like staved off. It took like 100 years before these mans were able to finally break through and objectively defeat this native tribe in particular. But you never hear that story. You always hear the story of the poor natives, and they couldn't do nothing for themselves, and the blankets that came and blah blah blah, they slaughtered them and murdered them and chased them out. And they always make the natives seem like they were tree huggers. They were always kumbaya and hugging trees and loving each other and stuff like that. Like they weren't murking each other, and they always talk about the natives as the natives were native to the land, not talking about them as also voyagers to that particular place. Nobody's native to nowhere. Maybe somewhere in Africa, that's about it, but everybody voyaged off to somewhere else. You know what I'm saying? But again, you don't hear those type of stories. You know what I'm saying? And it's always some story that paints the West as like these evil colonizers. By the way, every nation out there, Ottoman Empire before were colonizers, still colonizers to today. A lot of the nations, we talked about this in the last video, that are Islamic nations now are nations that were colonized, you know what I'm saying? And so colonization is not like a thing the British invented. It was always, you know what I'm saying, Boom, boom, boom. Anyways, let's move to the next point. Let's see what else we got here. Uh, so like I mentioned earlier, the fact that the redeemable characteristics are not talked about, like, the West brought a lot of amazing things. Now, of course, it's not solely because everything is humans building on what the other humans are. When we talk about Western innovation and inventions and stuff like that, we're talking about like mainly popularizing it and spreading it to the globe in the form that it is today. So, like the legal and political operating system is something we have to thank the West for, like rule of law, the concept that the king or the president is not above the law. This started with the Magna Carta and evolved into modern constitutionalism, right? Individual rights, the Enlightenment idea that rights are inalienable. The Magna Carta thing that I spoke about earlier, this is like a innovation in, this is something that wasn't recognized holistically across the globe. And I mean, some people would say not really. It's still kind of like that. There's still hierarchy and authority, but before it'd be like that. Hierarchy was a thing, and not everybody was held to the same rules. As opposed to today, if the president does something that is provably like definitively like seen as a crime, he could be arrested and, like, what I mean, blah blah blah. Now I know some people will say, well, no, presidents, but those, a lot of that stuff is arguable, and then some of it is real, and then it takes power to go and arrest those people, right? Individual rights, you know what I'm saying? The idea is that you know these rights belong to the person, not the group or the government. This is the foundation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You know what I'm saying? Another great contribution of the West is democracy itself, right? And self-governance, right? While ancient Greece started it, the West refined the system of constant of governed, which is now the global standard for legitimate leadership. So we have the West to thank for democracy. Of course, they were building on something that was invented by the Romans, right? Was it Romans or the Greeks, right? The scientific and medical revolution. I'm not gonna keep reading through it. German sanitation, vaccination, the printing press. Ooh, bro, a lot of this stuff I don't know if you guys are getting the weight of like what this stuff means for the world that we live in today. You know what I'm saying? Economic uplifting, right? Uplift, right? The Industrial Revolution. That is an amazing turn of human civilization. And when we talk about poverty and things like that, this actually helped alleviate poverty to a vast extent. In fact, the rest of the world lived in poverty for pretty much what they would say is like 200,000 years. Of course, you guys could argue that, but for like all of human existence. And due to the Industrial Revolution and other things like that, contributions of the West, we actually have been able to eliminate most poverty and bring more people out of poverty than any other civilization on the face of the planet, right? So you got the capitalism and property rights. By allowing people to own what they create, the West incentivized innovation and led to that led to the Industrial Revolution and transitioned humanity from muscle power to machine power. Global trade infrastructure. The West developed the shipping, banking, and internet system that allowed a farmer in a developing nation to sell products to a consumer in London or New York, lifting billions out of poverty. Since 1990, the global poverty rate has plummeted from 36% to less than 10%, largely driven by developing nations adopting Western style market reform and technology, moral breakthroughs. We talked about this one, abolitionism, right? Like abolitionism is abolishing slavery. This is a Western like led thing. It started really by Christian white men in, there's always been, again, I'm talking about largely, right? Of course, there's always been people that would have seen this as immoral and wanted to like stay away from it on every side, black people, white people, everybody, right? So you always find people like that. You might want to look up a dude named Cassius Clay, which Muhammad Ali was named after, and all this type of stuff. People fighting for people's rights, people living like family before those times, people interracial marriages and all that type of stuff happening before those times, choosing love and going and dying for what they believed in, all through human history. You know what I'm saying? But largely it was the West that was responsible for helping to bring us to the place that we are at with slavery now today. Mind you, though, you might want to look into this. Slavery does exist, and in even higher numbers than those times. Like, even though it's less globally accepted, because the human population is so high, and because we consider things like sex trafficking and like all that type of stuff slavery. There's about 50 million slaves today, which is probably the largest number of slaves that has existed on the face of the globe at any other time in history, right? The British Empire used the Navy to forcibly stop the Atlantic slave trade. This was a radical departure from thousands of years of human history where slavery was the global norm. Equality of women. The West pioneered the legal and social movement for women suffrage and equal rights, a standard that is now used to measure progress globally. You know what I mean? A lot of these people hollering, oh, the West and America is so racist and they're so misogynistic and whatnot. You ask them where else they want to live on the face of the planet. They don't want to live nowhere else because they're the best doing it right now. You know what I'm saying? Where y'all want to go live? Pakistan? Where y'all want to go live? Saudi Arabia? Where y'all want to go live, bro? You know what I'm saying? You get beaten for not wearing a hijab or something like that. And then y'all are out here talking about, oh, equal wage and demonizing the West for nothing, bro. When we look into this stuff, it's all a farce. It's fake. It's not even real. You know what I'm saying? Of course, there is a difference between men and women. That's inalienable. You can't take that away. And it's always going to exist. And employers will always look at that type of stuff. For instance, you got 2 employees and one of them is going to take a whole year off, maybe 2-3 times in her life. You know what I'm saying? Because she has to, she's going to have a baby and stuff like that. And you know what I'm saying? Women, it's a part of the consideration as an employer for sure, right? But the West is the best doing it anyways. Technological, what is this, frist? You know what I'm saying? Technological revolution, if you want to put it that way, or what is it? Yeah, whatever. A list of the modern world is essentially a list of Western inventions. Communication, the telegraph, telephone, radio, television, and the internet, transport, the steam engine, automobile, and aeronautics. So like flight, essentially, airplanes, if you will, engine or other stuff, helicopters and stuff. Energy, the electric light bulb, nuclear power, and the modern silicone solar cell. Okay, so there is a popular narrative that the West grew rich by making the rest of the world poor, but history tells a different story. For 99% of human existence, poverty was the default setting for every person and on every continent. The West didn't invent poverty, it invented the exit ramp from poverty by combining the scientific method with individual liberty and the West created the engine of progress that didn't just build skyscrapers and put men on the moon. It created the tools. By the way, we did go to the moon. Y'all crazy. Stop the cap. You know what I mean? It created the tool that have lifted more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty in just the last 30 years from the education of smallpox to the eradication of smallpox, the eradication of smallpox. Where was I? To the creation of the silicone chip. Western civilization didn't just change the map; it changed what it means to be human. You know what I'm saying? That's your boy. Honestly, a lot of this information I use Gemini for. You know what I'm saying? That's your boy Gemini's words, not mine. But you know, what I mean, you guys get the point. I talked about different regimes already. We can skip that one. The enemy factor and the rule of play. So this idea, the rules they play by. You know what I'm saying? So this is the idea that we is okay. Let me say two things here, right? First of all, if it's in the game, use it. I owned it. I owned a game shop for a while, a video game arcade, right? And we had this game called Mortal Kombat Trilogy. You could apply this to any other game. And it's a fighting game, and people would come in, they would sit down, they would get to learn the controllers. Eventually, somebody would learn moves in the game that some other kid would call me and be like, yo, this man, they get angry, they get upset. They say sometimes I've seen people cry, I've seen people throw fits, I've seen people rage quit and whatnot. Because some guy in the game figured out a move that they find is cheap, and indeed there are some moves in the game that seem kind of cheap. You watch a man, say play Mortal Trilogy, and a man figures out that sweep button, and it's like trip, 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 and you're done, bro. Those couple of trips take down your whole life bar, and you're dead. The man just beat you up in the game using only trips. But the problem is, like, I learned as a video game arcade owner, right, to not tell my kids, to tell the other guy to stop tripping the other guy. You know what I'm saying? What I learned to do is say, if it's in the game, figure it out and use it. You know what I'm saying? Because your enemy's going to use it against you. You know what I'm saying? And so the idea that, the West has to play by certain rules and their enemies are not playing by those rules. You know what I'm saying? When you look at something like international law, for instance, and people are like, oh, they broke international law. I'm like, dog, when the man attacked them, they broke international laws. You know what I'm saying? At this point, you're a criminal. For instance, when we talk about, you're not allowed to kidnap somebody in general. But what is it? When you get arrested, what is that? It's like legal kidnap. They're coming to your house, they bang down your door. That's a break and enter. You know what I'm saying? B&E. They grab you out of your bed, throw you into a paddy wagon, chained by your hand, and you go down. But we all think that is justice, right? Because we have a system of justice. And if you break the law and you do certain things, they can come for you and legally do that to you. By the way, that's a part of the slavery thing too. They can put you in slavery after that, because if you broke certain laws and you go to jail, you could end up working there, which I fully support, by the way. I don't think taxpayers' dollars should be funding all these mans, like grown, strong, middle-aged men. Bro, if you in jail, you should be providing food for yourself, meaning they should put you to work enough. You know what I'm saying? But of course, this stuff gets sticky. You got to watch the industrial complex, and you got to watch whether they start jailing people just to get free slavery out of them. So you got to watch this type of stuff, and we need to create regulations around that as well. But I do think if you're in jail, taxpayers shouldn't be funding you for 3 free meals a day. You should be doing something with your hand during the day, working and paying, you know what I'm saying? and paying for your own meals and accommodations, as measly as they are, right? You know, say the jail system should like take care of itself. Also, war too. Let me say that. You know what I'm saying? War should fund itself. Meaning, you go to a country for whatever reason and you get into there and you have to, bro, take the resources. I know I'm gonna sound wild. Take the resources to pay for the war. You know what I'm saying? Because that's just stupid. You know what I'm saying? The idea that you're gonna go there and your taxpayers and your own men have to like risk their lives and die. You gotta send your children and your son and they have to die in this thing because of something some other nation is doing, because of some security risk, because of some threat that against your nation. And you gotta be the virtuous moral character. You have to go there and stop it from happening and spend your own time and resources and your own like taxpayers dollars, and basically we're cattle. You know what I'm saying? We're basically being used as bonds. Like, if you ever heard about this, where they're giving out money based on the fact that they know that Americans, Canadians, whoever else are able to work and pay it back. You know what I'm saying? They're taking out loans on you, brother. You know what I'm saying? They're taking out loans knowing that you're gonna pay your taxes. Gee, you know what I'm saying? Trillions of dollars in debt, by the way, you know what I'm saying? Every single time. So I think, we got to reevaluate our relationship with war, even because it's seen as immoral. Oh, they're going there for the oil. Yeah, take the oil. Of course, you need the oil at that point. You know what I'm saying? Because at least in some kind of fair way where, you know what I'm saying, you guys are equally mutually benefiting. And this is something I was going to talk about in another video one time, about how we could work together as various nations and things like that, because there are people out here that are hell bent on like murking certain people. They've like fully subscribed to this, like, we're forever at war, we're always gonna hate each other. But there's a lot of nations out here that are just, mans are trying to live, they're trying to do their thing, they're trying to, they don't hate nobody, they don't want to do nothing, they just want to, you know what I'm saying, live and grow and develop. And like, I'm saying, let's work with those places and work together and hold hands and kumbaya, you know what I'm saying? And build, you know what I'm saying? Figure out how we could be useful to them, how they could be useful to us. We'll make a whole video about that the next day. Anyways, so that's the enemy factor. The factor is that there are nations who don't play by the same rules, and you can't expect, the US to always operate. There's people who are going to take advantage of what they know about, you know what I'm saying, how you act morally or ethically. And so you have to know how to navigate those situations. If you have people who love your rights system because they want to take advantage of your rights system, and once they get their rights and they get into power, they're going to then take away everyone's rights. Those people, we shouldn't play by the same rules for those people. You know what I'm saying? They shouldn't be allowed to become to duly elected and things like that, because they're basically going to seize control and seize power for themselves to then subvert the democratic process and things like that, right? Here's the counter argument, right? The claim is that the West created all of these Islamic terror groups and those type of things, right? Like, and the idea is like Western intervention often leads to devastating results for these nations and things like that. I'm just gonna, you know what? I'm not even gonna read through these. I'm just gonna talk about it for a second. I have a lot that I could read here and a lot of supporting information for what I'm about to say, but I'm just gonna say it, right? Because we're gonna be here for another hour for sure. So basically, let me break it down for you. This is what happens. The West intervenes into certain nations. Maybe I'll read some of it, actually. Maybe I will. You know what I'm saying? The West intervenes into certain places, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, right? And largely what happens, like, let me list a couple of places where it did work out, right? South Korea, for instance, right? In the 1950s to 1953, the intervention, the U.S. and the Union coalition intervened, stopped the North Korean invasion backed by China and the Soviets, right? The result, without the West, the entire peninsula would be under the Kim's dynasty today. Instead, South Korea was liberated and transformed from a war-torn, impoverished nation into one of the wealthiest, most technologically advanced democracies on Earth. The contrast: a nighttime satellite photo of Korea Peninsula shows a dark, starving north and the South Korea literally glowing with electricity and life. You know what I'm saying? So this is a case where it worked out for them, and of course, you know what I'm saying, it worked out for the world. And this is a thing that you're gonna see largely. One of the points that I want to make is a lot of times when the West intervenes, the blame then lands on the West because their intervention led to certain huge issues. You know what I mean? However, when we do look into it, it's not so much the way I see it. The reason it doesn't work out for some nations, right, is because of their inability to adapt. You know what I'm saying? If they take the adoption, right, and they adopt the Western civilization, the systems and the like things that they do, if they look at the West and they're thinking, okay, what are they doing right? Why is it such a nice place to live? Why are they thriving? Why are they ahead in all of these areas? You know what I'm saying? How could we emulate that? And any other nation, if we find that a nation is doing better in education, we should think, okay, what are they doing in education that's right? Something I admire about Japan, I never been, but I heard people that been there. I heard that it's mad clean, like there's no garbage, nothing, you know what I'm saying? And it's because the education system teaches the youths to, like, you know, behave ethically and, like, you know what I'm saying? And it's just not a thing that they do. They keep garbage in their pockets. They don't have trash cans all over the road and stuff like that. I don't know if that's everywhere in Japan, but anything that you could see in a civilization that you can then emulate that will work for your civilization to, like, you could learn from it. And just not even like nationwide, like even interpersonally, if you see a dude that's doing well in the area that you want to do well in, then you need to figure out what it is this person is doing right and then emulate those patterns in order for you to do well. And so a lot of the nations that don't succeed are nations that don't adapt. They're hell bent on their system, they're hell bent on their way, they're hell bent on their own ideas, and they don't take the correction, they don't take the guidance, they don't take the, like, you know what I'm saying, the freedom and the liberation that's offered to them, and they go back to the old systems, or they have other people within the system that are corrupting it, right? Talk about the Balkans, Kosovo and Bosnia in the 1990s. The world watched as solo wait Slobodan, I don't know how to pronounce this, Molchevik, oversaw ethnic cleansing and genocide in the former Yugoslavia. So the intervention is NATO, led by the US, launched air campaigns to stop the Serbian military slaughter of civilians. The result: the intervention ended the Bosnian War and led to Kosovo War, and later the Kosovo War, right? So it ended those two, and then it stopped a genocide in progress. The legacy today: Kosovo and Bosnia are independent, developing nations that are largely peaceful and seeking to join the European Union. Grenada, this is Operation Urgent Fury in 1983. A hardline Marxist military council overthrew and executed the Prime Minister of Grenada, leading to chaos and threats to hundreds of American medical students on the island. The intervention: the US and the Caribbean allies invaded, disposed the military junta. The result: the dictatorship was dismantled, the students were rescued, and democracy was restored. The sentiment, unlike many other interventions, Thanksgiving Day is still a national holiday in Grenada to commemorate the day of the US led intervention. So it worked out in Grenada as well. Kuwait is another situation that worked out. Probably not going to read it, just going to leave it, right? Sierra Leone is another situation in 2000 that worked out as well. There is something called the cost of inaction, right? That should be considered, right? Because a lot of times when we look at the situations where, the U.S. intervened into a situation, and what happens after, you know what? I'm just gonna kind of explain what happens in general. No, you know what? We'll get down to it, but sometimes there's like an immediate thing that follows where like after the US leaves, so this is called the vacuum. It's like the US comes and they try to do their thing, and they kind of take over. They overthrow a dictatorship, they overthrow some kind of power struggle, they dismantle a military or something going on there, and then they leave. And then in the vacuum of that, groups like ISIS, groups like what are these guys? The Taliban and stuff like that. You'll hear that they took over Boko Haram, this that took over some sort of nation or something like that, and then of course, I'm saying the death and the slaughter and the death tolls start to rise and stuff like that, and then people blame the West for that. And this is something where I'm like, yeah, that's Western intervention that kind of led to that. But there is something to consider when we're thinking about dictators and like people who are already there murdering and civil wars and all this type of stuff that's going on. There's something called the cost of inaction. Sometimes it's known as the Rwandan effect, I believe, as well, right? Because let's say a powerful point for our defense here is to ask what would happen when the West doesn't intervene. So in Rwanda, the West stayed out and 800,000 people were murdered in 100 days, right? So their intervention would have led to less people being murdered in that situation, at least theoretically, right? Cambodia in 1975, after the West pulled out of Southeast Asia and Khmer Rouge murder. Is the man's name? Again, I'm not good at pronouncing these names. Khmer Rouge murdered nearly 2 million of their own people, right? That's called something in the killing fields, I believe. The defense logic. Critics blame the West for the mess of intervention, but they rarely credit the West for the millions of lives saved by preventing dictators from finishing their genocides. So this is something that the U.S. has been doing. The U.S. has been the empire of the world, and they've been largely involved in policing. It doesn't always work out, but sometimes it does. And then there's times where they don't intervene, and then we got to ask ourselves what would happen, right? There's 3 different terms that help to complicate the issue further, right? The bystander effect. This is similar to what we were saying just now. This is likely what you are referring to. This is Gemini talking to me. I shouldn't have read that. In psychology, the bystander effect is a phenomenon where the individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. The Rwandan connection. In 1994, the bystanders were the Western powers, the US, the UK, and France, and the United Nations, because everyone was waiting for someone else to take the lead. Almost no one intervened until the slaughter was over. The lesson this led to massive shift in Western foreign policies known as responsibility to protect, or R2P. The idea that the international community must intervene if a state fails to protect its citizens from mass atrocities, right? The Rwanda syndrome. This is the term used specifically within the U.S. government and the UN. It describes the guilt-driven hesitation or the extreme caution that followed the failure to act in Rwanda. Right? It created a never again mind state that influenced later interventions, such as NATO bombing in Kosovo in 1999. And the West essentially said, "We failed in Rwanda. We cannot let the same thing happen in the Balkans." Right? The Cobra effect. Sometimes people confuse these two. The Cobra effect occurs when an attempted solution to the problem actually makes the problem worse. So that is a possibility as well. While not unique to Rwanda, some critics argue that the early limited Western aid to refugee camps actually ended up feeding the perpetrators of the genocide who had fled across the border, accidentally prolonging the conflict, right? So this is what happens. Sometimes you intervene and you actually make things worse, and it's like it's a part of doing anything, bro. If you're gonna do anything in life, you're gonna have to learn that you're not gonna be able to do it perfectly all the time. You're gonna fail sometimes. Sometimes you're gonna try to help. You're gonna make it worse. As men, we know we do this all the time, especially when it comes to with women. Now, your boy doesn't have a lot of experience with women, but I just have the knowledge of what people have described to me. Apparently, we have this thing where we, try to help, and we always try to mansplain, and we always try to fix women's problems for them. And sometimes we do. Sometimes we make things worse. So we're going to talk about Muammar Gaddafi again. I'm not going to read through all of this, but I'm just going to kind of give you an outline of what's happening, right? Muammar Gaddafi was like an incredible leader, prolific, I don't know that he was necessarily a good guy or a bad guy. I don't know what to say, but I do know that his ideas, have led to some good results and some bad results. In any case, this is an interesting character in history, and so for the most parts, he kind of liberated his people. He not liberated them, sorry, he lifted them out of poverty. And so when not Umar, what am I saying? Hold on one second. Where are we? I always call this man. Yeah, it's not Muammar Gaddafi though, is it? I feel like I call him Muammar Gaddafi, but his name is. We're gonna call him Gaddafi for this duration of this topic. Any case, so Gaddafi, for instance, really did. He nationalized his oil, and Libya had a lot of oil at that time, and he was able to create housing systems. He was able to give people, set people up financially. People really loved him at one point or another, and he really was like a wall, created a border between Europe and mass migration into Europe in any case. And so he was doing some pretty prolific things. He was planning on eventually trying to move away from the dollar and trying to put in a gold standard for Africa. And he was trying to basically create independency within Africa between themselves, where they didn't depend on the U.S. However, he did largely hate the U.S. and he did have a lot of really grim things to say about the U.S. and whatnot. And at some point or another, he was kind of a dictator as well. He led a whole about 40 years, I believe, with no elections, no free elections. He criminalized other parties from being able to run, and so he subverted democracy. Although he believed that he had some form of democracy, although he didn't, and his idea was kind of strange. He wanted to hold power because he felt like he was the dude and he was supposed to like correct all this stuff. Maybe after he was gone and once he fixed everything, maybe then he would believe in democratic elections and whatnot. But ultimately, this led to him not allowing what he would consider dissent or criticism of his government and things like that. That caused a lot of hate within his own society. And ultimately, the U.S. intervened at a critical point. They took out his military and his. There was some revolutionaries or some uprising, some people within his local within Libya that were after him, that was ultimately through this US intervention ultimately ended up taking him out. Now after Gaddafi was taken out through the US intervention, Libya didn't seem to be doing too well, right? And then there's all these little uprisings and these little tiffs and there's all these little groups and factions that think they know how to run the country and how the country should be ran. And this is an example that you can copy and paste across everywhere where you see U.S. intervention where it doesn't work out. And this is what's happening, right? You'll have these little groups. You'll have the Taliban, and you'll have the whatever, like the little militias and stuff like that. And after the power is removed, the strongman they call him, then you have these other people fighting for what should happen. You know what I mean? And you'll have more debts that are associated with that, right? And so, like, Gaddafi is one of those guys that is a great example of this, essentially, right? He demanded 7 point something trillion, accusations of biological warfare. He liked Obama, you know what I'm saying? That's another thing. Objective to reality argument. I have a lot. I should do a whole video on just Omar Gaddafi. Otherwise, we're going to be here for too long. So, sorry, I should just say Gaddafi because I feel like I might be butchering his first name. I was actually looking in my notes to see if they have his full name over here, but I didn't. Anyways, refusal to exile. He didn't want to leave. He basically decided to stay and then ended up getting cooked. But, that was a tragic situation how he got cooked, bro. These mans found him hiding in a pipe, took him out, murked him, essentially, and burnt him alive, beat him in the streets, bro. So this guy had like a superiority complex as well at some point. He when his people started turning against him, he didn't believe that they were actually turning against him. He believed that they were under some sort of mind control or something like that. He started believing that there was people putting stuff in their drink or something and making them crazy, and that's why they didn't like him, because he thought for sure they would. And a lot of people did like him, but like some people didn't, because he had this whole Green Book thing and you couldn't disagree with anything in there, and it became like a very police state. People were watching you, and like he was starting to execute students and things like that. Now these people who dissented against him, he started calling them rats and stuff like that, and he wanted them murked. And so he was leading, it looked like he was going to lead a genocide against his own people ultimately, before the US ultimately intervened. That situation is complicated. Some people would say the US intervention actually did stop a genocide, and some people would just look at how Libya was doing prior to, although the tension was ramping up, and they're just like, yeah, no, like they're not doing as good now. Let's see. Let's see. Should an invasion happen? That's the question. The answer is yes, of course. Like we gave the cops and robbers thing. There are times where intervention is necessary, right? Should spoils be taken? We already answered that, right? I actually believe that spoils should be taken in war because it should fund the wars, right? Of course, I do think that there needs to be regulation on that stuff too, because then people might just go directly to war for resources. Although, you know what I'm saying? Like intervention is necessary sometimes, and there should be some kind of fair trade going on where both parties are benefiting, like Venezuela for now. Like if Trump's intervention into Venezuela actually works out better for the Venezuelan people, which they seem like they are like very fond of what happened, at least with Maduro, because you know what I'm saying, he's been somebody who has been like a terrible leader for them for all the years, and so they're happy about that. But like if it works out overall for the US and them, and if it cuts off, you know, China and Russia from having the resources that, you know, was threatening, you know, saying like the US economy or like their abilities and stuff like that. This is all chess, by the way. So, you know, if that situation works out to be a mutual benefit for the Venezuelans and America, then you know what I'm saying, that's something akin to what I'm talking to. The cost of doing nothing, we talked about that. Three different types of interventions. We didn't talk about that, but I want to look at some things uh, when it comes to the West and dealing with these type of sort of interventions, right? And I want to start by saying a number of details don't fully account for everything, right? So the issues that we highlight, some of the numbers that we're looking at, some of the details that we're looking at here, they don't account for everything that's happening. Like for instance, a lot of the smaller tips and the little issues that get overlooked are not going to factor into these statistics and these things that you'll see, right? We don't all we don't need all of this to point out some act of injustice, right? So the idea is like, even if we look at all of this type of stuff, it's not a deterrent for someone to look at some small act of injustice somewhere and point at that and be like, oh, yo, this thing that America did or this thing that like someone did is wrong or something like that, right? So we don't want to overcomplicate it. You can look at an act of injustice and say, hey, this is not right in a smaller case, even without like the full broader context, right? It fails to compensate for many attacks that were intercepted. So there are a lot of attacks that were meant to happen that didn't happen, that were intercepted, and these numbers won't show those details. This data also doesn't account for events having to be canceled. So there's a lot of threats that happen, and certain events and things had to be canceled because of those threats. And those, if those attacks were carried out, they would have changed the numbers that you're looking at today. This data fails to account for cover-ups, and that we know that there's many personal attacks, and like, you know, you look at Britain for instance, and the massive cover-up for the grooming gangs over there because of the fact that they thought this would cause racial tensions and stuff like that. And so, you know, they were trying to be PR, and ultimately they covered up. And I believe there's more darker stuff even higher up than that that is responsible, but like that's one of the reasons that's given. And sometimes that's what's happening, is like, you know, we're now starting to figure out a lot of these shootings and these things that happen in these situations. A lot of these people were trans identifying people, or people who are like pro-trans and things like that. And so some of these details have been obscure from us for a while, because they, you know, some people just thought, hey, you know, these are not helpful information, this is not information we want to give, it's going to be like a right-wing fantasy, and so we just don't want to, like, you know, give them that. And it's going to, and maybe they have good reasoning behind it, they're thinking that it's going to be helpful in some way, but a lot of times there's a lot of cover-ups, and so this data is not going to account for that. This data does not anticipate the trajectory of the stuff that we're seeing that's happening, right? So there's like a ramping up of stuff, and so if these trajectories continue, this stuff is going to get a lot darker. So, you know, what we're looking at, the data sets, it doesn't really account for that as well. Now these are really dealing with relatively recent history, right? So we're not accounting for ancient history, which needs to be accounted for as well, but we're talking about data within the last 20 to 25 years thereabout, right? let's see. This also doesn't account for the way some wars were fought on a single battlefield with mass accumulation of deaths and the like mini spats, right? So I talked about this earlier. Like sometimes we have tunnel vision when we're looking at history. We're only looking at certain empires and certain things, and so that's what we're seeing. But there's a lot of mini spats and other like little wars and things that are happening all over the place that don't get documented. And people come across these mass graves and bones and stuff like that, and they deduce what happened there. But for the most part, because there was bigger historical major wars, major players involved, people were so focused on that. Like for instance, even within our media, there's so many things happening in the world right now, but only certain things are getting covered, and so that's what history looks like as well. So I wanted to point that out as well. This also, so that's the tunnel vision thing. Okay, so the proportion of violence, right? So if we look at specifically at the direct violent deaths, right? There's about 940,000 people that are killed. This data shows the Western forces are responsible for a relatively small percentage of those specific deaths compared to anti-coalition or sectarian forces, right? So when you see that number, for instance, only a percent of those deaths are directly caused by the US's actual, like by military strikes or bullets or like someone being killed, right? And we're gonna look at what causes the majority of the deaths after. Take the Iraq War in 2003 to 2011 as a case study. Coalition forces, UK, US, and etc., responsible for roughly about 12 to 15% of civilian deaths, right? Insurgent slash anti coalition forces responsible for about 11 to 15% as well. Unknown perpetrators, mostly sectarian slash criminal. These are people who are there in Iraq, right? Responsible for nearly 74% of civilian deaths. Can you believe that, guys? So what we're looking at now, we've gone through all this stuff. This is like the meat we're getting to now. I know it's like really late into the video, but this is what we're talking about. You know what I'm saying? These unknown deaths were largely extrajudicial execution, torture, and night raids carried out by various militias during the height of the Sunni Shia civil war, right? So the mechanics of the vacuum. Why does this happen so consistently after Western intervention? It usually comes down on three main triggers. I don't know if I could say this. The authentication, stanlinization. Oh, bruh, I'm cooked. Models in Iraq, the U.S. Disbanded the entire army and government overnight. This left hundreds of thousands of armed men unemployed and humiliated, providing the perfect recruitment ground for insurgent groups like Al Qaeda and Iraq. So this is where you got people saying the U.S. created Al Qaeda, or but they don't really create these groups. There's people here with ideas of how this place should be run, and then because the U.S. intervenes and takes away the strongman, the main power, then this is where these people are able to build these forces. You get what I'm saying? So, in a way, yeah, they created them, but they kind of created them in the vacuum of removing that power. And so this is why I'm saying the West is kind of to be blamed, but not fully. And so when we look at it, there's more going on that is accumulating to the blame, right? Ethnic slash sectarian power shifts. When the West tries to install a new government, it often inadvertently, yo dog, some of these big words are catching your boy. inadvertently favors one group over another. Example, shifting power from Sunni to Shia in Iraq. This created a survivalist mindset where groups believe they must kill or be killed to maintain their place in the new order, right? The police state paradox. Dictatorships in the Eastern world often use brutal police forces to keep a lid on sectarianism. When the West removes those police forces, but it can't replace them with an effective, trusted local force, the country spirals into every group for itself. So this creates a lot of problems and infighting that then leads to the death tolls rising or widening, right? Terrorism as a result, not a cause. The data from the last 20 years show that 88.9% of all deaths from Islamist terrorism occurs in Muslim majority countries. This confirms our point, right? The vast majority of these violence, often attributed to these conflicts, is actually local groups killing other locals. However, critics of the Western policy argue that while the West didn't pull the trigger in these cases, they created the environment where those triggers were inevitable by destroying the existing social fabric, right? Summary. A Western The Western toll is high because Western intervention often acts as a catalyst. It breaks the existing system, and the resulting reverberation violence. Right. So sectarian wars, ISIS, tribal feuds accounts for the majority of the bodies. 12.5 million people were this is the figure that we're getting at here, right? Likely comes from looking at the broader historical scope of Eastern or intra-Islamic conflicts throughout the 20th and 21st century. While the last 20 years of the Western-led wars show a heavy toll, especially when counting indirect deaths, that 12.5 million figure highlights a different reality, a sheer scale of debt caused by internal civil wars, regional power struggles, and sectarian fighting often occurs completely independent of Western boots on the ground. Here's how that accumulative number breaks down when you look at the Eastern nation infighting over border, etc., right? So the heavy hitters of whatever. The reason the Eastern tolls climb so high is that several wars fought between or within these nations have been significantly more effective at killing than Western interventions, right? In Iraq in the 1980s to 1988, often called the World War One of the Middle East. This was a purely regional conflict between two Islamic powers, estimated for the debt range of 1 million to 2 million, right? The Syrian civil war in 2011 claimed about 500,000 to 600,000. The Sudanese civil wars claimed about 2 to 3 million. The Yemen civil war claimed about 377,000, right? I'm not going to read all of that, but sectarian and self-inflicted violence, right? So a huge portion of the totals come from groups attacking their own religious and ethnical others, right? So the intra-Islamic toll, right? The data for the global extremist monitor and Fundapol shows that between 85% and 90% of all victims of Islamic terrorism are themselves Muslim. The Sunni and Shia divide in the Iraq vacuum we discussed earlier, nearly 75% of civil civilian deaths were attributed to sectarian militias and death squads rather than direct combat with Western forces. So, we're looking at something like almost a million people being killed like by Western forces. This accumulates to something I believe that is including the multiplier. So there's a multiplier whenever there's a death toll in a lot of these wars because they do three or to 4 to 1 ratio. So for instance, for every one person killed by a bullet or a gun or something like that, there's another 3 or 4 people that are going to be left dead in the vacuum. Not direct deaths, these are indirect deaths. These are usually deaths that are caused by system collapsing and the failure and infrastructures and, like, what I'm saying, even like something called a brain drain, which we probably should get to. Ultimately, this is where a lot of the more brighter minds usually leave, a because they have the money and they could get out of there, or they're kidnapped and used as pawns on the chessboards for like ransom money and all this type of stuff, and this often drives them to leave. By the way, there are some nations that like experience the same things but bounce back a lot better than the eastern nations. And when we look at those nations, it's because of those type of things, because they didn't experience the brain drain as much, because they had like these type of they had this muscle memory for regrowing their systems and stuff like that. And the engineers and those people still stayed and helped and rebuilt the country, and they were generally together. So when the US and when these other forces left, they didn't start infighting, they just started rebuilding together, and so that led to them bouncing back a lot quicker and led to sort of the war being over. There's another concept here as well where they accepted defeat. So a lot of times, a lot of these are forever wars, right? So in the sense that, like, Russia and certain places, when we had tiffs with these places and we effectively won those wars, what happened is they at some point they were like, yeah, we got crushed, we got cooked, and they were done, the war was over. And they, like, of course there's still tensions and stuff like that, but for the most part they accepted their defeat and they kept it moving. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes some of these wars, there's sort of like a pride there where they never admit that they got defeated, and they're looking at it like, okay, we're just going to continue battling for life. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of stuff that contributes to the death toll accumulating in certain interventions after the US leaves, or after the US is done doing whatever they came to do there, or these like Western nations are done doing whatever they came to do there. And we have to look at those. That's what I'm trying to get at right now. And what we're seeing here is a lot of the death tolls are actually like it's in the system. It's built on A, the infrastructure collapse, B, the brain drain, and C, the infighting that occurs after the US leaves. The struggle for power and the struggle for maintaining their trying to like in folk, or in, like, what am I saying, like, put their sort of structure that they want to see govern the world, their world, in place, so that way they can govern over the other people who are existing here, right? So comparing total death tolls, let's see, that 12.5 million figure definitely includes both direct and indirect deaths. To give you a full picture, that specific number comes from a significant study often cited by the Turkish Historical Society and various NGOs, looking at conflicts involving Muslim majority nations over a roughly 25-year period. Here is how that 12.5 million total is actually built and why it includes those factors and those ratios, right? The ratio is the same, just like in Western-led wars. For every person who dies from a bullet or a bomb in an Eastern conflict, there are typically 3 to 4 other people who die from the aftermath. If that 12.5 million figure were only bullets and bombs, it would mean that the war nearly 3 times as violent as World War I, which isn't supported by the battlefield data. Instead, the numbers include starvation, disease, and displacement of people as well, right? So these are things that lead to those type of things, right? Major contributors, right? Okay, so we should skip by a lot of this stuff here. Let me see if there's anything useful more that I wanted to talk about. The nature of the vacuum. Let's move to institution muscle memory. So, like Germany and Japan, I talked about this earlier. Like, they were already industrial powerhouses before the war. They had a muscle memory for how to be a modern state. Modern Eastern nations are often rentier states, which rely on oil or have borders drawn by colonial powers that doesn't match ethnic realities. When the central government is removed, the country doesn't rebound to the previous state of peace. It often fragments into older tribal or religious identities, right? Post World War II, European modern Middle East slash East, human capitalism. Okay, we're just gonna skip that. Security, immediate, and total. There's too much information. These videos would be too long. Healthcare collapse is one of them. Economic ruin and food. So, like, that creates insecurity. Wars often destroy agricultural supply chains in places like Afghanistan and Yemen. Malnutrition and starvation accounts for a massive portion of the death tolls long after the major battles have ended. So, like healthcare collapse, for instance, the brain drain we talked about is doctors fleeing the country. The destruction of hospitals and a lack of basic medicines mean that people die from routine issues, childbirth, infections, and chronic conditions like diabetes that they would have survived if, you know what I'm saying, the medical system was still in place, right? Let's see. Western intervention, remove, brain drain again. We already talked about that. The scale of the exodus. All right, we already talked about that. Let me just see if there's anything else. I think I'm just gonna kind of wrap up. I'm gonna leave this, the verdict of the recovery. The stability versus sovereignty paradox, the strongman. So let me talk about this for a second, right? So whenever there's an intervention, there's these three sort of options. One is called the strongman. You leave a dictator like Saddam or Gaddafi or Assad in power. The death toll is lower overall, but the population lives under oppression, torture, and occasional massacres. Of course, we talked about this earlier where we're saying that this could eventually, that toll could end up adding up to more. And this is one of those things that should be mentioned as well, as we really don't know. You know what I'm saying? We really don't know what the world would have been like without the US or Western intervention overall. I like to think that, like, looking at the data sets contribution overall, I say it's a net positive for the universe. I definitely think, at least for like looking at history and looking at the way people governed over time, we've been, as a human race overall, we've been like sort of through all the different ways to govern and ideas and thoughts and things that we can go through, and we've been learning and refining and refining. And I think what we have in the Western civilization is the apex of the accumulation of historical errors, what we call trial and error. You know what I'm saying? They've been trying things and things have been failing, and we've been looking at this. This is how we built our society. Actually, is by looking at things in history and going, "Oh, we've seen what happened with the USSR, with the socialism and the ability to not adapt that properly. We've seen what happened with, you know what I'm saying, this group in history and that group in history and that group in history and all the different things that they've implemented, and then we've created sort of like rules and structures and things like that, trying to sort of avoid what we've been seeing as downfalls of other nations. And then of course, sometimes we have, what we call historical amnesia. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like we forget what we went through at some point or another, and we repeat mistakes, and then we got to relearn lessons that we've learned already. This happens both with us and like other people as well. Choice B, the full commitment model, right? If you intervene, you don't just drop bombs and leave. You stay 30 to 50 years, like the US did in Germany, Japan, and South Korea, when hundreds of thousands of troops prevented the vacuum from ever forming. So this is another option. Says strongman, you just leave the dictator in power. In this option, you break it, you bought it. That's what it is. If you intervene, you have to stay there and stabilize the place yourself before you can actually leave, or if you ever really leave anyways, right? And then there's something called the Lightfoot approach. This is when you remove the leader and don't stay enough to force them to stop sectarianism and self-inflicted violence, or you keep the water flowing. So this is the case where they go in and they don't stay long enough, and then they leave, and then they leave the vacuum, and then all this stuff we're talking about, destruction of like infrastructure, destruction of like simple things that can cause, like allow for transportation, the structure of simple things, the medical, and whatchamacallit, that's like the immune system of the civilization. If you take away the immune system, of course you're gonna have people dying, and then of course not being able to like stop sectarianism and having people with different ideas of how to run the world then go, or they govern themselves, then sort of have a lot of infightings, and causing the death tolls to rise to astronomical numbers. You know what I'm saying? Let's see summary of your logic. I'm just gonna skip the cost of doing nothing. We talked about that. The geopolitical domino effect, we talked about that. Comparing on alternative timelines, we talked about that. High direct costs. Oh, so there's a reason why the US doesn't stay all the time when they intervene and try to like think. The truth is, like, they can't always, you know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes when they intervene, they can only really stay there for a little bit, because sometimes it's like a really high direct cost to the US for the intervention itself, right? So that's probably something ought to be noted, right? I ask all these questions when I'm doing these research. I'm like, so then why do they leave? If, like, you know what I'm saying? So I get answers, and then I give them to you guys, and then I hope it kind of gets wrapped up in this super long video into a digestible Tootsie Roll, so that way you can kind of get a picture of what's happening overall. So the next time someone says to you, well, it's the US, and the US created Al Qaeda, and they created the ISIS, and they created blah 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 blah. They're the ones in the intervention, and they're the ones because they keep rinsing people's resources, and you know what I mean? Which is the next point we're gonna get at. This idea of rinsing resources, right? It is U.S. dependence, right? Domestic consumption, about this is their domestic consumption, right? About 68% of the US GDP comes from personal consumption. American citizens buying groceries, cars, healthcare, and streaming services, right? Exports. Only about 10 to 11% of the US GDP comes from selling things to other countries. For comparison, in Germany, exports make up about 50% of their total GDP. The verdict, roughly 9 out of every $10 in the US is generated from the US's economy by activity happening inside the country, not by selling goods abroad. The U.S. is pretty self-sufficient. That's what this study is saying. So the idea that they need to go and, like, that's not the vast majority of their money comes from within. Now, companies in the US is another story, right? So there are companies that are private owned, and those are not necessarily associated with the government in any real way, except for paying their taxes or operating within the system. But, like, you think about a company like Exxon that's in Guyana right now extracting oil. You could say that company is getting resources that then is then taken and refined in the US and then sold globally or something like that, or used in the US after they're sold to US citizens, that then contributes to their GDP. And so you could say that's them rinsing resources, not necessarily, that's a company. And of course, they're buying the oil and they're taking it, and then, that's fair trade. Anyways, so let me see. This video has been an hour and 40 minutes. Last time I sped up the video, and I don't know if that's a good idea because it was very unnatural. I don't think people really enjoyed it. I don't know if they did. But basically, what am I saying here? This whole video is being called It's Not the West. And overall, what I'm saying is, look, bro, whenever you see these things where people are saying, hey, man, the West is the reason all of this stuff is happening on the face of the globe. Again, that's not totally true. It's like void of context. And so a lot of this other stuff, understanding, the cost of not doing nothing sometimes and what that can cause, understanding the times that the US intervened and it caused like positive effects across the globe, understanding the reasons why it doesn't work sometimes when they intervene, understanding how the debt tolls really accumulate, and is the US directly involved in like causing that, and some of the ways that they're indirectly caused, and what is actually the direct cause of those debt tolls rising in certain places. Understanding these complexities of the brain drain and the infrastructures being destroyed and things like that are layers of these conversations that need to be had, because those statements are not, those statements are like, when the devil came to Eve, he told like half truths, you know what I'm saying? And that's what it's like. It's like a half truth. It's like they're saying something that's, you could say, yeah, like someone could say the US created Al Qaeda or something like that. That's not totally true. You know what I'm saying? It's like intervention that happened that left a lot of military age men, like, unemployed and angry, and created the background for where these people were able to grow, and like created the situation in which these guys wanted to like, do their thing and sort of subvert and like take over power, and like, what I'm saying, ultimately somewhat, but like it's not the total truth. There's a lot more context that needs to be had, and there's more than what I presented in this video. Of course, this video is 2 hours long already. We got one more to go in this series. We're going to talk about, I'm really excited for the next one. The next one, we're going to talk about the suicidal West. Man, I'm excited with the background of it is Islam, with the background of it's not the West, and then looking at suicidal West. Now you're going to see something that's happening, that's brewing right here in our midst, that's like really causing a lot of the chaos that you're seeing in front of you right now. You know what I'm saying? This is the build up to, man, I think it's going to be a great video. I wish I had made it before Maduro got caught. Anyways, I'm out of here. Thank you guys for listening. I don't know if is there someone that listened to this whole almost 2-hour video, bro? If you're out there somewhere, you know what I'm saying, I don't know, like, come heal me up and be like, yeah, dog, I listened to that whole video. I know some of you probably do, and out of your own motives or whatever, but it's hard for me to believe anyone would sit and watch a 2-hour long Daily Boy ranting video. But I don't know, I feel like it's good information. Thank you guys for rocking with me, for being here. Like, subscribe, do all of that good stuff. You know what I'm saying? I hope you're getting educated. I pray that you're, becoming, somehow this is all helping you to become a better, more informed, and more tactically aware Christian slash civilian of whatever society you're from. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Bless.